Hi, I'm Jaded. You may remember me from such films as Beta Discussion Barbarian, Beta Discussion Demon Hunter, and Grandma's Boy. Well, I wasn't actually in Grandma's Boy, but I do call my parents my roommates. So the Witch Doctor. Before I played the beta, this was a class that it's probably the class I was least excited to play, and quickly sort of changing that opinion instantly. As when I first tried him, it was just like once you get the ability to just spam out tons of summons, whether it's frogs or spiders or whatever, the class really takes on a feel that's kind of unexpected, and it just seems to amplify when you play with other Witch Doctors, and they're just spamming out tons of summons as well. There's like a real uniqueness to this class. So let's go through the skill breakdown. Now, you start off with Poison Dart. And without any runes, this is going to do 100% of your weapon damage, and then take an additional 40% and add it as like a poison dot at the end for 2 seconds. And I should say too, with all these primaries, they are different mana costs, and we'll get into why, and also the runes have a big effect on the Witch Doctor's resource management. And there's not a lot of them in the beta that you get to play with that are resource managing, but later on, it's definitely going to play a huge role. So you get 2 runes with the Poison Dart in the beta. The first one you get to test out, it shoots 3 darts in succession rather than just 1 dart. And there's no poison, it's just flat damage. The second rune you get just very simply applies a 60% slow to your target, and that only lasts 2 seconds. And looking at one of the other runes that you get later on at level 25, this is what I was talking about earlier, where there's some resource management. So instead of, okay, it costs 5 mana every time, it's gonna give you 13 mana, and I believe that that's gonna scale over your levels. So as you get higher level, it's gonna give you more mana back. Looking at Corpse Spiders here, this is one of the abilities that really allows you just to spam the screen with tons of summons. So you basically lob a jar of 4 spiders that explode out of the jar and attack whatever is close by. And they don't really roam too much, but if it's within their range, and you have the like leaping spiders rune, for example, they'll leap onto the target, or they'll just walk over it a little bit. They don't really roam too much, and they don't follow you, and they'll disappear after being out for a little while. This is definitely a skill where if you hate spiders, it will definitely creep you out a bit. Take for example this rune here, summons a spider queen that births spiderlings. I can only imagine what that looks like. Here's another resource managing rune. So every time your spiders hit, they'll return 2 mana to you. So if that scales up, and also it's going to be per spider, and they hit quite rapidly, so that's going to be a lot of mana return to spam your more powerful abilities.
Got some going on here. Hey Sugar Mama, I haven't seen you around this place. Oh hell no.
Looking at Plague of Toads here, this is a skill that I didn't particularly love, mostly because of the short range and how slow the frogs move. And just like the randomness of where the frogs move around. So you notice too, it costs 18 mana, whereas the other ones, they cost like 5 and 3, and Firebomb later costs 6. And the reason is, it has the potential to do a lot more damage than those other skills. It's a lot more burst. And another thing you'll notice as well, through all the skills, they all cost mana, except I believe there's only one skill that doesn't cost mana, and that's Sacrifice, and we'll get to that later. So there are no runes currently in the beta for Plague of Toads, but you start to notice a trend here. There's a lot of turn the skill into fire frogs, or fire spiders, or fire darts, or whatever. There's definitely a theme there of fire and poison, and sort of a spiritual side of things. So the first rune you get just straight up deals more damage, turns them into fire bullfrogs. And then this one, which I guess is a more interesting one, we saw it earlier at a BlizzCon where they were discussing skill mechanics and sort of how crazy they can get. This is definitely one of the more crazy ones. You summon a giant toad that swallows enemies whole for 5 seconds, and I guess just does like a sort of a dot type of damage as it digests. But also thinking about it, it's kind of a crowd control on its own right, and that actually puts a cooldown on the skill so that you're not spamming these giant toads out. And then the resource specific rune only removes the mana cost, it doesn't actually give you mana back on this particular skill. So taking a look at the secondary page here, Grasp of the Dead, this is going to be an AoE that you place on the ground where your mouse is, and it just deals a damage over time to whatever's standing in it, as well as slowing everything. And the only rune you get in the beta is not that exciting, and actually I prefer the animation of the original skill. So what this does, it just adds 20% more slow to what it does. Yeah, kind of boring, but checking out some of the other more interesting runes here. This one you get at 53 is pretty bizarre. And sort of that's the theme for the Witch Doctors. There's a lot of bizarre type skills that are just hilarious. So corpses fall from the sky, deal 80% weapon damage as physical over 8 seconds. And I don't know if it actually removes the slow. It might, because the initial skill is not meant as a big damage skill. It's more like a crowd control this area with a slow. But yeah, I can't wait to see some of these runes and how they look in game. It's definitely one of them. Moving on to fire bats. So the way this skill works is initially it's a cone type fire breath that you shoot out of your mouth, and it has pretty decent range, but it is still a pretty short range ability. The first rune you get with this, well, at least the one in the beta currently, is Dire Bats, and it changes how this skill works quite a bit. So instead of shooting this conal fire out of the front of your face, you're gonna lob these long-range bats like straight down, passing through everything. So they don't get stopped by collision. The only thing they will explode on are walls in the environment. Again, too, with the randomness of this skill, just like the toads, it never felt like you have complete control of where the skill goes, because the bat sort of has a mind of its own. It travels down and it kind of veers off, and each one's different. So that could be a bit frustrating, especially because it is a high mana cost ability that like one of these bats, if it misses, you know, you're out a big chunk of mana. But I can see people getting kind of annoyed with that. Alright, moving on to Haunt. So this skill is a dot, and it goes where your mouse is, and it doesn't collide exactly with other targets. For the most part, you can click behind the line, and it'll like go up and over everything to get to that monster you have highlighted. So it's pretty precise, and it deals a lot of damage, but it's over 12 seconds. And once that target dies, the spirit will sort of float over to a nearby target, and then continue to do damage. Taking a look at a rune that I think is going to be very useful, at least kind of helps the mechanics of the skill a bit more, because sometimes what happens is you'll kill a mob with this ability, and then the spirit doesn't have enough range to like bounce very far away, so it'll just die off and you'll have to cast it again. But what this does is the spirit after the target dies will just linger in the air, and if a mob comes walking in close, it'll start doing damage again and pick up on a new target. So that one I think is pretty good. And then another resource mechanic here, the spirit will return mana per second. Depending on how these scale and how long it actually lasts on the target without dying off, it could potentially give you more mana than you spent on it. So moving on to the defensive section, we got Summon Zombie Dogs. Now, this is the only permanent summon you get currently. So what Zombie Dogs do for you, you don't have to get this ability. I feel like every Witch Doctor thinks you have to, and it's like a core mechanic to have summons. But you actually don't really have to play like that. But what they really help you with is to distract and to tank damage for you. They have a ton of health, and that's essentially their role, is to take a lot of damage, because they don't deal very much. If you leave them, you know, just to kill everything, you'll be there forever. But for the most part, they stop monsters from getting close to you. The first rune you get just adds a basic damage over time effect on their regular attacks. Looking at two of the later runes that can kind of help you defensively. One of them absorbs 10% damage that you take and puts it on the dogs. And then the other rune, basically the damage that the zombie dogs do, not only heal themselves, but will heal you as well. So they could definitely be used as a survivability skill to keep in your arsenal. Moving on to Horrify, this is similar to the Monk's Blind. It's just an AoE crowd control, and anything in 12 yards around you gets feared, and then they run away for 4 seconds. And quickly looking through some of these runes, you can get increased movement speed after doing it. You can increase the radius, double the radius of the effect, as well as you can gain 100% armor for 8 seconds. But that one's kind of curious to me because if you fear something, it's going to be 4 seconds of them running away, and then they're going to have to walk back to you. So I kind of feel like the additional armor you get from this might not be taken to full advantage because you're using your crowd control during it. But it might be really useful in situations where like maybe like boss fights or something like that, or really hard elite mobs. And of course it'll help you with like anything ranged that's shooting you with arrows or whatever. So moving on to the terror section, Soul Harvest. This is a skill that is both bad and overpowered, and I'll tell you why. So when you use this, every monster around you gives you a stack of intelligence, 36 intelligence per monster, and it stacks up to 5 times. And that buff then lasts for 30 seconds. So what makes it overpowered is it essentially doubles your damage, depending on your gear and depending on how this scales, of course, later on. But the fact that it's such a strong buff, if you don't get 5, so it's actually quite hard to get 5 monsters around you that are alive. Mind you, they have to be alive, they can't be dead. And if you're with a group of people, they're not gonna wait for you to use this ability. And that's kind of where this skill is not very good. So if you're with a group of people, the running through, the killing everything as fast as possible, you have to stop for a second, stop being a ranged damage dealer, run up to 5 enemies, try to group them up, and then use this skill to get buffed, and then go back to being like a ranged caster. So that's one problem, which is, actually that's 2 problems. First off, you have to be in melee range, and then you have to have 5 monsters that aren't killed already. And hopefully by the time you press the skill, you know, one doesn't die or whatever, and then you lose some of your damage. And then the third part of it is, if you had 5 stacks and you're refreshing this, if you only hit 3, it's gonna drop you down to 3. Like, it doesn't refresh all 5 just because you hit 1. It's not forgiving like that. So this skill was a huge annoyance for me because it is a large chunk of your damage to keep this up. Like, it's essential to keep this up. I mean, potentially going from like 50 DPS to 100, that's pretty huge, you know? But there are some runes later that you get that sort of help the quality of life of this, and I'm hoping makes it not as tedious as it is right now. And that rune you actually get kind of later in the game at level 39, which it increases the duration of the effect to 60 seconds. So you only have to do it once every minute. But I still get the feeling that the like fundamentals of this skill are just wrong for the class. Or I don't know, maybe they could tweak it in some way to not make it so tedious. So the next skill is Sacrifice. This is the last one you get in the beta at level 13. You essentially turn your dogs into walking C4. And this is the only skill I noticed that doesn't take mana. But because of how often you're able to use this, it doesn't really matter. There's no cooldown to this skill, but your zombie dogs have a 1-minute cooldown. So you can essentially get it off twice in a row if you have your zombie dogs up and then the cooldown comes back up. So you can blow them up, resummon them, blow them up again if that was your thing, if that's what you needed to do. I didn't find too much use out of this because of that long cooldown on your summon. Like, if you could resummon your dogs, blow them up, resummon your dogs, blow them up, like, if there's no big cooldown, like, I would have a lot more fun with this skill. But looking at one of the runes that could help that, each zombie dog you sacrifice, you have 35% chance to resurrect a new one. So I guess you could blow them up, get like 1 or 2 new dogs, blow those up, get 1 or 2 new dogs. Like, it could have chain effects that could be really strong with this rune. So there's hope there for that. And then you can also use it later to get mana back per dog or life back per dog. And then the final rune you're gonna get increases your damage 5% per dog that you sacrifice. Now that's all the skills that we have currently. So taking a look at the passives, this is an interesting one because it might help sacrifice out a lot, which is whenever an enemy dies, there's a 5% chance that a zombie dog will just automatically come out of the ground. But it has to die within 12 yards. And it says that like any item that you have with the increased gold pickup radius will help this passive out, which is kind of neat. Like you wouldn't really expect a stat like that to affect a passive. So it's kind of cool that they threw that in there. Next one you get is Jungle Fortitude. This is very simple, just reduce all damage taken by 20% and as well as your pets. Get that as well. And then the third one is your max mana gets increased by 20% and you also regenerate 1% per second. So it really helps your resources out there. So when it came to the skills that I mostly use, I found this class to be the most flexible. Like it didn't really matter what you were using, it was all pretty decent and it all worked relatively well. But I'll break it down here. Poison Dart, it was between this and Corpse Spiders. Like Plague of Toads wasn't a huge fan of. Like I said before, Corpse Spider is very cheap if you're into like the zerginess of summoning tons of stuff on your screen. For secondary, I mostly used Fire Bats, and with the rune you get, it's just a lot of damage and it does it through a straight line of enemies, so it pretty much crushes anything in the beta. Haunts I didn't really use too much just because it's a very micromanagey skill and everything just dies so fast already that the 12-second dot isn't really put to use here. And then Summon Zombie Dogs. I didn't find Horrify to be particularly useful. On the Monk it makes sense where like you kind of want to stop the damage you take. But here you're not really ever in danger because your zombie dogs tank for you. And so I didn't really use this too much. It has a pretty decent cooldown on it too, so you can't like spam out the CC. And then the last one, Soul Harvest, just kind of essential if you want to do twice your damage, I guess. Like it's really strong right now in the beta. As for passive, I stuck with the resource one. I kind of want to go back and try this one again to see if like you could get a lot more use out of sacrifice with it. But yeah, that's the Witch Doctor. If I missed something, let me know. I'll probably put it up in annotations or something if it's important. And remember at the end, I'll have the links for all the classes if you haven't checked those out. So thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next video.
Spirits aid you.